12:01 Mills. It's time to go inside Utah politics, and we do begin today with Beaver County Commissioner Mark Whitney. Commissioner, great to have you on the show. Thanks for being here.
Glenn, thanks for inviting me. I sure appreciate it.
Well, we always like to check in with those who represent rural Utah as much as we can. Very important part of our state. So let's get right into the state of rural Utah. This has been a rough year with the pandemic. How are you managing?
You know, it's been really strange at the Capitol, but they've done a really good job of trying to make all our lawmakers accessible to us. It's kind of like a ghost town up there, a lot of people there, but several commissioners, and so it is totally unusual. So different year, but we've learned to adapt with it. Everything is everywhere is unusual.
Yeah, across the board. But specifically, budget-wise and impacts on rural Utah, how have you been handling the pandemic? You know,
and bless us, you know, sometimes we don't see the best of times. So with that, the fortunate side of it is a lot of times we don't see the worst of times. Now there are some businesses, especially a lot of your diners and cafes and some of the places like that saw some downturn. But for most of all, I think rural Utah and Beaver County, with the exception of in-house dining, we stayed completely open. Everything was open other than in-house dining.
And as a result, what was the impact on Beaver, Utah that way?
And as far as Beaver County, as I said, there were several businesses that was impacted and quite heavily, and those were mainly the restaurants, bars. But for the most part, with the exception, you know, we was one of the last of a handful of counties that even saw a case, and then we got quite inundated with a lot of the cases. But our numbers are going down. Again, we're wide open now, and so not a lot of negative impact at least in Beaver County.
So looking back at it now, the way you handled it, you feel like you made the right decisions?
Absolutely. I mean, we followed the governor's orders, and I feel like the governor, for the most part, I think handled that pandemic real well, and he had a great team that he worked with to advise us on what to do. There were some things that sometimes we may disagreed with, but we still tried to follow those orders. But it worked well in our county, at least in our county.
Okay, so you mentioned already how unusual this is for the legislative session. You're satisfied with the access you've been able to get to lawmakers? Because I know that's been frustrating on a lot of people.
No, I'm not completely satisfied, nothing like it has been in the past, but I have to say that there is not one lawmaker, and I'm talking all the way from, you know, all the way from the bottom clear up to, you know, appropriations, chairman's, leadership. There's not one of them that did not welcome me to their office when I needed to get in, or that we needed to get in to discuss either appropriations or bills that we was working on this year. So
okay, let's dig into some of those specifically. Emergency management services. This is something I've had you on in the past. I think perhaps the last time was back in 2019. You and Commissioner Bushman came on the show to talk about this.
Right.
At the time, you were talking about a very dire need to make sure that that system was healthy and running properly. Give us an update on that.
I feel really good. We've got a couple of bills before the legislature right now, House Bill 303 and House Bill 419. 303 addresses it to make EMS an essential service like police and fire protection. Hopefully that bill is going to pass because they truly are our front line too, and it needs to be an essential service. 419 deals with giving those frontline workers, those volunteers that are EMS directors and workers, free access to health insurance, because we're calling it the recruitment and retention bill, to be able to try to recruit and then retain those EMTs that work very hard to get licensed, because they make very little, and we're not able to pay them a lot in rural Utah.
Mm-hmm. And I need to correct myself, we're talking about emergency medical services there.
Right.
I said management.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, just to clear that. I said management, not you, it was me. Just to clear that up. Okay, why should everyone else in the state of Utah care about that?
Well, because you got to remember, and I say this because we welcome everybody to rural Utah, but rural Utah is the playground for the Wasatch Front. And so when you come down there, you got to remember 90 to 95% of all calls, whether it be search and rescue, EMS, are non-local citizens, usually people from out of state, out of country, the Wasatch Front, and so it's a strain on our services and on our budgets. So, and it's hard enough to get those essential workers to want to do it, let alone do it and pay for it. So.
Yeah, I know search and rescue has been very busy, and the system has been strained. No doubt about that. Health insurance for first responders, another issue that you're working up on Utah's Capitol Hill this legislative session. Talk about that.
Well, again, we're calling it the retain and retention and recruit bill because so many of those workers or EMTs do not have health insurance. So it's a way that we can at least try to pay them to do it and get the legislature to step up and help pay that bill to pay these volunteers, and that's what they are, is volunteers.
Yeah, let's dig into that a little more. Let's explain why they don't have health insurance, and you said it right there. This is mostly a part-time volunteer situation, correct?
Yeah, and these are a lot of times people that just do not have, in fact, I can tell you most cases, these are a lot of people that care a lot about the people, but yet they don't have the benefits available through their jobs. And so it's a way that we can step up and at least try to help these people that are willing to help our people.
Mm-hmm. And how confident are you that that's going to go through this legislative session?
I can't tell you that. I feel good about it. I mean, we have definitely worked very hard. Commissioner Darren Bushman, it's kind of his baby, and he has pushed the ball very hard, but the Utah Association of Counties with our lobbying team and a bunch of commissioners, we've all worked very hard to push this bill through because it's very important.
Okay, appropriation's always a big part of the session for rural counties. We've seen a surplus, and they're talking tax cuts. Are you going to get the appropriations you need to manage rural Utah counties?
You know, certainly not all of our wishes, but we're hoping to get a few. One of the big ones that we're working on, certainly, at least in my county, and I should say statewide, counties contract for about 1,600 beds to house Utah inmates. And my county's the largest. We contract 360 state inmates. And we do it for a lot less than what the state does, but yet it's costing us more to run those services. And so we're looking for an appropriation there for the state to step up and pay their portion of what we do to save them a lot of money.
Yeah, I actually came down to visit you one time in Beaver County to do a story out at the jail there on that very issue. Let's talk public lands. That's always a huge part of the story when we're talking about rural Utah. What are the top issues on your mind when it comes to public lands?
Again, now we got another administration change, and already with the executive order, you've seen more executive orders issued the last 60 days than the history of any incoming president, and most of these affect public lands. You've got one that's called the 30-30, and that means that they're going to lock up 30% of all public lands and water in a conservation areas by 2030. There's already a ban to where there's no more mineral extraction, oil, gas, and mining. So we're seeing it, and again, we need to extract those resources in rural Utah to provide jobs and keep our economies thriving.
So the argument on the other side always is that we need to preserve these lands as well. So where do you see the balance, if you will?
There is, I mean, Glenn, you've been to rural Utah. There is a lot of country in there. And you can preserve these lands and still mining. You can take the oil and you can reclaim them without even knowing a lot of times that somebody's even been there. So there is a balance. We've still got to use those resources to where we're not dependent upon foreign countries.
Okay, one last question for you. You already mentioned it, you know, executive order reversing the previous administration, that administration reversing the administration before that. I've asked a lot of people this question. I'm going to present it to you as well. What good is it when every time the White House changes parties, we're seeing these executive orders that have such an impact on rural Utah? Is there a better way to go forward?
Absolutely. I mean, because I mean, what an executive order, if it can be overturned, I mean, you know, you've got the chance of a president being changed every 4 years. So every, you know, theoretically every 4 years, an executive order can be changed, and they always are. So there's got to be a better path forward. Congress has got to come up with a better way to safeguard these executive orders when they're put in place.
All right, we will watch and see now this happens. Of course, the president also looking into, once again, Bears Ears and Grand Staircase Escalante and potentially expanding those monuments. Commissioner, always appreciate your time. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much, Glenn. Pleasure to be here.
Still to come, the crime of complicity. Should those who turn a blind eye be held accountable? We'll dig into that debate a little bit later. But first, revamping the Paycheck Protection Program. The new focus